But I want to say first and foremost, again, thank you all for coming out today. I want to extend a warm welcome to everyone for coming out to our third discussion um, for the Black Ecologies Discussion Series. As you know, we've organized this discussion series around three particular themes: extraction, disposability, and resistance. And I've been really looking forward particularly to today's set of talks, because I think that we're thinking about resistance here. And I think trying to chart a new horizon for Black ecologies and Black geographies. And I'm hoping we have some really good conversation today. I'm sure that we will. Again, to give you a little background information about the Black Ecologies Initiative, hosted by Arizona State University. This effort builds on a collaboration between myself and Professor J.T. Roane at Arizona State University to think about Black ecologies and Black geographies in community with artists and organizers in order to imagine horizons beyond extraction and disposability. We hope to draw on the histories of Black resistance to racism and ecocide as twin forces in order to interrupt the death and degradation of Black and Indigenous life, and to chart alternative horizons for ourselves and our communities germane to these histories and socialities. Me and JT have written together, and shout out to our forthcoming piece in Southern Cultures that'll be out in the fall of this year. And we planned this event, we co-organized this event together along with some really important people. And it's really my great honor to be here today and to present this final discussion to you all. We are, of course, indebted intellectually in this work to so many key thinkers in Black studies and Black geographies and in Black environmental thought, some of whom are on the program have been on the program over the past few weeks. Of course, we don't want to go down the list of the path of citations because, of course, we don't want to leave anybody out. But thank you for all of your work, and we kind of really indebted to the work of critical Black studies scholars and scholars in Black geographies as well. We are also heavily indebted in particular to two of JT's mentors, Dr. Claudrina Harold and Dr. Wendy Marshall, who you'll hear from today. They continue to provide models for us about how to think, how to act, and how to create in the service of Black possibility, Black liberation, Black art, and Black futures. For this particular program, we would like to thank first and foremost our co-conspirators in pulling this program together. Emerald Rutledge, PhD candidate in English literature at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Leah Kaplan, PhD student in philosophy at Emory University. And Alexis Young, an undergraduate 4+1 journalism major at Arizona State University. Without their contributions and help in organizing and devising the themes for this panel, we could not compose this program. So thank you so much to them. We are also very grateful to our sponsors, Arizona State University's Institute for Humanities Research, JT's own home appointment in African American Studies at Arizona State University in the School of Social Transformation, Deans Madavi and Cohen in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at ASU, Dean Boone in the College of Global Futures, this is the School of Philosophical and Religious Studies, the Digital Humanities Initiative, and the Environmental Humanities Initiative. In particular, we want to thank Jeannie Coquette, Kike Palacios in SST, and Selena Oshuna, Lauren Whitby, and the tireless Liz Grumbach at IHR. Thank you, Jeannie. I always thank you every time. You know why. Thank you, Jeannie. I'd also like to shout out and especially thank People's Strike, which emerged last May out of a call with leaders at Corporation Jackson calling for mass action against the conditions of disposability brought on by COVID. And also thinking about really the ways that essential workers and police murders and all the controversy of the past year really have brought the idea of kind of the ways in which people of certain communities have been exploited in the response to COVID and in the cleanup of COVID as well. In many ways, our efforts to bring together these materials are in dialogue with the People's Strike's demands to decarbonize the economy, to end fossil fuel and extractive industries, to institute a program based on reparations, repairing damages to frontline and fence line lands and communities, the restoration of indigenous sovereignty, land back, and the transitioning of workers in petrochemical, nuclear, and extractive industries into ecologically sustainable work, as well as food sovereignty policies, ending industrial food and animal warehousing conditions that stimulate and germinate viruses like COVID-19 that contaminate our soils and also deplete our soils and our water tables. Lastly, I would like to thank the contributors to these discussions. As you will see today and throughout the entire series, honestly, we have some great discussions here. We thank you for your time. We thank you for your efforts. We thank you for submitting your materials and for being here for the Q&A as well. I want to also plug next week our discussion, our final keynote will be with Dr. Ashante Reese from the Department of African and African Diaspora Studies at University of Texas, Austin. I'm going to paste the link now to register for that particular keynote. 1 second. Okay. So you can register for that keynote there. But Dr. Ashante Reese has some really compelling work on thinking about carcerality and sugar in East Texas. And I think that she's going to share a bit of that with us in her talk next week. I'm really looking forward to that. In terms of our format today, we will have a series of pre-recorded materials hosted by Professor J.T. Roane and followed by a live discussion. Please feel free during the talks to use the chat to underscore any insights, to uplift any insights or thoughts to which you are bearing witness. After the pre-recorded talks, please have your comments and questions ready and use the chat function or the raise hand function to get your questions out. At that time, we will also pin participants to the top of the Zoom so you can see them, engage in dialogue with them directly and see who they are. Please note that these discussions will be recorded. So if you would like to remain off video, that's totally fine. No, not a problem at all. So just please get comfortable, take care of yourself, and that'll bring us a long way towards practicing the collectivity that we need to survive our current environmental situation. Please note this discussion is polyphonic, so no one's coming from the same experience, the same understanding, the same interpretation, the same method, the same mean, the same modes of creation, etc. So please, let's just be respectful of each other, even if we disagree with expressed ideas. Automatic closed captioning has been implemented. If you would like to activate it as well, you can see it on the Zoom, the live transcript closed caption button. And thank you again for coming out today. So I'm going to turn it over now to Professor J.T. Roane to kind of bring us into our discussion today.
Thank you so much, Justin. And thank you all for joining us. I want to begin just with a moment of silence for both George Floyd and Ma'Khia Bryant. Just a moment of silence. Thank you. We know that there's so much going on right now, and it's confusing. You know, we're presented with sort of the most meager forms of and thinnest forms of justice at the same time that we see the ongoing disposability of Black life. So I'm particularly excited about today's conversation. I think we have some really great art, some great discussions to jump into. So before I get on my own little path, let's go ahead and begin with the first folks that we have. We'll have Wendy Marshall, who's a Philadelphia-based community organizer and a member and an organizer for the National Organizing and Labor Committees of our co-sponsors People Strike, in conversation with me, as well as Kali Akuno, who's the coordinator of Cooperation Jackson in Jackson, Mississippi, and who also is who made the call for a general strike in early last April and May in response to COVID that prompted People Strike's formation. So I'm going to turn it over to that clip and I will join you soon. Good morning. I really appreciate you all joining us. I want to just open it up for you both to just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're working on.
Well, I'll start. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Kali Akuno. I live in Jackson, Mississippi, better known as Mega Eversville, or Chisafoka, which is the Choctaw name, indigenous name. I am the director of Cooperation Jackson, which is a small project, which is 7 years of age, which is trying to transform our local economy from an extractive capitalistic one into one based upon solidarity, mutual respect, mutual aid, and self-sufficiency, particularly for Black people in our community. So this is my day-to-day work, grind, hustle, struggle, headache, but it's a labor of love, labor of joy, and looking forward to digging in and seeing it bear more fruit over the years and decades to come.
Thank you. Wendy?
Hi, I'm Wendy Marshall. I live in Philadelphia, and I'm currently on the National Organizing Committee of People Strike, along with Kali. And I have been involved in labor and community organizing since 1979, way before you. Glad to be here.
Okay, I want to start with a question for you, Kali. Just from your own analysis and from Cooperation Jackson's analysis, just and in consideration of the disproportionate Black and Indigenous COVID deaths, you know, the mounting economic crisis, the ongoing Line 3 push, and the kind of broader environmental crisis that signifies. Can you just comment from your perspective about the moment, about where we're at, and what it means?
Yeah, I'll start with from a kind of a big picture. And I think if we were to really take stock, we'd have to assess that humanity is in some serious crisis. We're in deep crisis. We've kind of reached some tipping points relative to the ecology on the planet, climate on the planet, that are, you know, it's going to take a long time to reverse. And these are threatening, you know, our species and all complex life on this planet with extinction. I mean, that is really where we are at. So, you know, if you can imagine kind of the analogy of heading over a cliff, by some measures, we've already gone over it. So it's a question of how we're going to land at this point. And I think we need to be honest about that, not from the perspective of kind of like doom and gloom, but from the perspective of we have a very limited amount of time to make some course corrections, to stave off the worst aspects of the calamities that we know are going to come, because we already see signs of them in the here and now. It's not like climate change is something that's far off in the future. It is here. You know, the folks who don't believe that, you know, just look at the increased hurricanes and monsoons, which exist, you know, on both sides of the planet now. We've seen record forest fires in the last 5 years, consuming, you know, every corner of the planet, from Australia to British Columbia. We've seen major drought. You know, the western portion of the United States is currently exhibiting a major drought that people are scared to death of already, about what the impact come spring, late spring, summer, what the next forest fire season is going to look like, might be on a record pace. We've seen major crop failures, you know, particularly the last 10 years, some of which have had some ground changing impacts. You know, what people call the Arab Spring was really precipitated by a drought, food shortage crisis, food rising crisis. So we are there. I mean, I could go on, but we are there. Now, the question really is, what can we and what should we do about it? One thing I think the COVID experience, I think, has taught us is that with the right political incentives and political leadership, that there can be mass global action to make some course corrections very, very quick. We saw that when it was very clear that this was a global threat, the nations of the earth did some considerably remarkable things. They shut down the global economy, right, to try to just make sure that the situation could be dealt with. Now, their efforts failed because they only half-heartedly did it, but it demonstrated that they had the political will to make some serious course corrections. And now this is on top of them saying, you know, now for decades, the global economy is too big, it's too complex, it's too unwieldy to be managed. That got disproved in the month of March 2020, you know, that things can change and change quickly. But we have to exert, I think, the major pressure on a mass global scale.
Oh, it seems like Kali went out. So while he's coming back in, Wendy, could you just, is there anything that you wanted to add to what Kali was saying, and also, just help us to think about what we can do alternatively?
Yeah, so one thing I just wanted to say, bringing up the question of COVID and uh, the zoonosis, the jumping of pathogens across species, is that COVID gives us a chance to look clearly at the destruction of industrial agriculture and the destruction of primary forests. And that is something that is not going away. COVID is one of a series of pandemics, and they will be faster and more furious as we move forward if we don't change our relationship to the earth and to each other. So I think one of the things I want to say is that the climate crisis, the crisis of the earth, is very much the same thing as the crisis of humanity. The relationships of humans to each other and humans to the earth are mirrored in the destruction of capitalism, you know, colonialism, white supremacy, and patriarchy. And that you can say, and I do say, that you can look at the roots of capitalism and see and predict this level of destruction. And through the ways in which capitalism, early capitalism, enclosed the land for private use and private enrichment, and stole the people for private use and private enrichment. So the degradation of slavery, the theft of indigenous land, the enclosure of European lands, all of those things point to the moment we're in now. But it also goes deeper than that. And it goes to the focus on dominion in Judeo-Christian Islamic theology and the injunction to control the natural world. So the crisis that we're in has very, very deep roots. And it will take a huge effort to figure out how to make a world along different lines. Kali's back.
Mhm. Right. Oh, welcome back. We're
Yeah, I don't know. Apologize, everybody. My phone is, the battery's not dead. It just cut off.
okay.
It literally just cut off.
All good. Did you want to continue some of what you were saying? Wendy had jumped in on thinking about the ways that COVID is tied to the ongoing kind of destruction of the natural environment, and the ways that that's rooted in our the longer history of capitalism and primitive accumulation and the kind of enclosure in European lands, slavery, and and um, and and genocide in relation to the Americas, and as well as the kind of broader colonialism, and was saying that our solutions have to mirror those deep roots of the kind of issues. Did you want to continue with where you were thinking with us, Kali?
No, Wendy was reading my mind. That's exactly that is exactly where I was going. I was just using, that is kind of a pretext. The only thing I think I might add is there was one thing that I heard in January, which was a shocker. Now I think it's hard to prove this, but it just even if it's only partially correct, this shows the total devastation and impact that capitalism is having on our planet. And that was that there's more constructed human material than there is biomass now, right? By many calculations on the planet, which is unfathomable. You basically, the metabolic systems of the planet have fundamentally been choked by this constant effort to expand and grow. And this perverse logic of the capitalist system, that you got to have infinite growth, perpetual growth on something with finite resources, finite space and capabilities. You know, and this logic that, okay, it's fine, we're going to come up with capitalism, come up with some techno solutions, right? There's some new technology right around the corner, you know, to do carbon sequestering. We're going to take all the carbon out of the air, you know, and put it back into the fuel economy. No fundamental consciousness from you know, the bourgeoisie about we need to do something different because life cannot sustain under these conditions. I mean, they've gone so far perverse with the logic of just saying, hey, well, we'll exhaust this little planet of ours and create colonies on the moon and on Mars, right? No plans on fixing, you know, this precious entity. You know, we'll just treat it as trash and move on to another one, to the next one, and to the next one, to the next one, which is not possible. You know, I'm a big science fiction, you know, nerd and geek, you know, Afrofuturist like most anybody, right? And I believe all of us got some elements of that in us. If we didn't, we wouldn't have a vision of the future, right? But we have to deal with the fact that our species has evolved to deal with the conditions here, right? The gravity here, right? The oxygen content here, the water content here. We were made for here, and we better start appreciating it before we totally lose it.
That's powerful. And intense. The situation with where we are in terms of biomass, that's very intense. So thank you for sharing that. Wendy, I want to jump back to you and then just about the like to take us deeper in terms of what are the alternatives? How can we build towards the horizon, a different horizon? What's the horizon that's outside of perpetual growth and the kind of ongoing, you know, colonialist violence of capitalism and racial capitalism? How do we how do we get out of this? What's the future?
Well, I think in fundamental ways, we have to look back because our indigenous and African ancestors certainly knew much better how to live in relation to each other and to the land. And so I was saying earlier that I was locating the roots of this environmental and human destruction in Judeo-Christian Islamic theology. And I think it is so steeped in earth culture across, you know, like geographies and time, that we have a lot of work to do to understand how to build a world that is based on mutuality, love, solidarity, and respect. And we know that. So if you think about police, prisons, military, and fossil fuels, you know, enormous drains on the resources that we need to build solidarity, love, mutuality, sovereignty, self-determination. And so the struggle against extractivism and disposability, the struggle against the destruction of the planet is very much connected to those struggles for abolition, anti-capitalist struggles for socialism. Those things are key. And those things also point us in the direction we need to go as human beings, as we figure out together how to build a planet, a world where extractivism, disposability are things of the past, where we understand the value of the earth, our mother, and each other, and build accordingly. So it's certainly not easy, you know, and it's certainly not new. People have been struggling with this since, well, let's say since the onset of Europe. But it's a righteous struggle. And for all of us who are called to be truly human, this is what we need to be involved with.
Kali, did you want to add to that? What are we build a different horizon?
I mean, it's going to take, building on what Wendy said, you know, a massive movement, but not one. I think this is one of the qualifying things. Not one that being on destruction, but one that's really rooted in new old practices, as Wendy said, that deal with how we treat the soil differently, how we treat the water differently, how we respect, other species on the planet differently. The whole process of production and the cycles around production, consumption, distribution, discarding, all of that fundamentally has to change. If there's to be any level of recovery, and we are seeing elements of that, start to transform. Like, just within the last decade, the extent to which just people's even acknowledgement of indigenous people's existence, let alone, the knowledge, the epistemology that comes with millennia of practice on how to live, on Turtle Island, or our ancestors, how to live, on the African continent, or how to live in the Caribbean, or how to live, anywhere, basically, that has risen quickly, and I think it's a positive sign of folks recognizing that, we have to do something different. And let's look to the examples of those who, live more harmoniously for millennia. And I think what part of what that is doing is eliminating people struggling and grappling with and eliminating the kind of the vestiges of colonialism which inhabit our minds, which we all have, but deconstructing that, right? Disavowing ourselves from it, trying to go into it deeper and put it into practice. I think our challenge is going to be, how do you do that on a mass scale with this many people, right? Now, it can be done. I have no doubts that, even with the billions of people on the planet, that it can be done. But, it's going to take some major shifts on our part to be able to pull together. Good morning. And, I think some of the things that we see in our communities of folks doing, might seem small, but I think this is the basic seeds of folks doing, urban and community farming, right? Mutual aid work and exchanges, particularly as these crises become more acute. These are the fundamental seeds, I think, of the transformation that we have to build upon and bring more people into practice with, which will lead to, better health outcomes for us. If we eliminate all this fast food and processed food, and the system is going to drive us to that point. Like I'm, for folks who don't know, in Jackson, Mississippi, more than 50% of the city has been without running water for about 3 weeks, right? So folks now are having to figure out, how to take care of their basic needs. Now, this is in the middle of a pandemic, which requires you to have running water to wash your hands, right? So how do we take care of each other when these kind of industrial systems collapse? And one of the things about industrial systems, they all going to collapse eventually, right? That is the very nature of how they're built, because they're not built on organic processes. They're built on transformative processes, which rot decay much more quickly than anything in the quote unquote organic world. So we are going to have to learn this on the fly, whether we like it or not. And I think the question is, can we start getting ahead of it? And can our movements start doing the kind of education and transformative practice that's going to be needed? And I think we are heading in that direction. And things that might seem small or minor in scale now, as we figure out how to scale up, they're going to be, I think, the cutting edge of the solutions that we need.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. That was brilliant and such a great contribution to this conversation. I really appreciate you. I'm going to stop the recording now. So thank you all for those of you who have just joined us. We're really just in the midst of this conversation. So grateful to Wendy and Kali for that. And we're, it is especially given everything that's going on right now, their words are really resonant. We're going to shift now to Huewayne Watson, who's a Jamaican-born fine and conceptual artist who also works in the School of Social Transformation as an instructor at ASU, and who has a forthcoming exhibition at the Philadelphia African American Museum titled Anna Russell Jones, A Life of Design, which opens in early May. So we will switch over to Huewayne, who, let me just say, this is stunning. So.
It's our home. It's not our house, but it's our home. And you guys all make part of that. So thank you guys for letting me be part of it. So that's it.
Good luck, everyone.
Okay. Oh, my little William.
All right.
No, gravity. Oh yeah, it's coming back.
That one defies gravity a little bit.
Huh? You did say this is gonna be it right here.
I'm really struck again, not only because I'm in some of that and it's, you know, my actual memories and nostalgic memories in particular of that moment, but just to see, you know, your powerful work, Huewayne, as an immigrant artist and what it means, what we can think about with the kind of the warming blankets, this kind of very minimal sense of sharing and community that we know has so much symbolic charge and importance right now. So thank you for sharing that. Next, we have Danielle Purifoy, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Geography at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and who currently serves as board chair of the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network. As you'll probably know real quickly, this wasn't the best day for me to host. Y'all gonna see too much of me, but we're really, really excited to hear more from Danielle about her very significant work.
Hold on, actually, let me stop this. So we are here with Danielle Purifoy to talk about some of her rich and exciting and important work in relation to the matters of Black environmental justice and Black ecologies. I'm going to turn it over to you, Danielle, to tell us a little bit more about the kinds of things that you're involved in.
Yeah, thanks, JT. I'm happy to be here. So my work focuses on the racial politics of development in Black-founded communities and towns. And to just explain, like, these are places that have formed really throughout the history of what we, now call the United States, as intentional places for Black freedom, for institution building, governance, and economy. And I'm interested both in how these places form and how they govern themselves. A lot of them are not sort of formalized legal towns. Actually, most of them, in my experience, are not. But they create governing institutions that operate in similar ways to local governments, but are not actually recognized by the state. But I'm also interested in what happens, right, when efforts, particularly of communities that want to become state-recognized towns, when those efforts intersect with white legal and political regimes, and how like all of that conflict and tension and contradiction, right, ultimately produces the Black places we see today. That's sort of in a nutshell what my work revolves around.
That's really exciting work. I think it's it's so much to be done, and you do it so importantly and so well around like the matters of Black place and again like in intersection with but not totalizing intersection with white power structures and all of that. I appreciate you sharing. I wanted to jump in a little more around some of the work that you've done as well, related to your scholarship, but as well your organizing work. So since at least 1987, the UCC's Commission for Racial Justice Study of Toxic Waste and Race in the U.S., it's been clear that Black and Latinx communities, in particular indigenous communities as well, are the victims of the disproportionate siting of toxic waste. Can you tell us a bit more about that situation in North Carolina?
Sure. So there is some dispute about this, but there are a lot of accounts that cite North Carolina as the birthplace of the environmental justice movement, or what is now known as the environmental justice movement. There have been multiple, I would say, environmental justice type movements in the United States and globally across history. But yeah, and that actually started in Warren County, North Carolina, in a Black community, not unlike some of the Black communities that are the focus of my research, with the siting of a toxic waste landfill. And what really happened there back in the early 80s was that civil rights organizers mobilized really highly visible protests and sit-ins and sort of die-ins, if you will, in opposition to that landfill, which was cited anyway, and they spent probably the next almost 30 years trying to get rid of that landfill and to get some sort of compensation for the harm that was done from it. And that really, within North Carolina, has sparked a number of, mobilizations over the last 30, 40 plus years at this point, which have kind of intersected with every kind of waste imaginable. So one of the most high profile forms of toxic waste that people know North Carolina for is hog waste. In Eastern North Carolina, we have what's called concentrated animal feed operations, where they pack thousands and thousands of hogs in to really confined corridors, where they where there's just a high propensity for illness. Their waste is collected in these what they call waste lagoons, and that waste is sprayed onto spray fields that purportedly as fertilizer, and it's essentially a way to get rid of the waste and to avoid the kinds of regulations that happen when big storms come and those lagoons overflow. But the consequence for the predominantly Black communities that live near that is that they are being sprayed with hog feces on a pretty regular basis. It's a really horrendous, nightmare, sort of out of a nightmare. And it's just not only, extraordinarily hazardous to their health, but they also, just their enjoyment of their lives and their communities, right? You can't have your family reunions in the summer. You can't do cooking out. you can't hang your clothes on the line, you can't plant your kitchen garden. All of those really, those activities that Black communities in particular are really known for across history are really precluded in a lot of ways by this industry. There are a number of others. There's human waste sludge that comes from wastewater treatment facilities. People think that, once your waste goes through the sewage processing system, that somehow the waste evaporates or disappears. It does not. It turns into a sludge, and they put it on various land applications that have some hazardous health impacts, and folks are tracking that more now. There's coal ash from Duke Energy. A lot of people know about the spill that happened, I think, back in 2014 in a little place called Eden, North Carolina. And then lately, there's been a lot of buzz about Gen X, which is it is a synthetic chemical that produces Teflon, the sort of non-stick coating on your pots and pans. A lot of the fabrics, it's in the fabrics that are in a lot of outdoor furniture. And it's produced by DuPont Chemours, which has a huge plant in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And that they've been essentially like leaking Gen X into the waterways of the Cape Fear River for decades now. So so they're just waste products in every kind of industrial arena. You will find it in North Carolina, unfortunately. And these are wastes that are not limited to North Carolina, but you will find them all kind of intersected, and mostly in Eastern North Carolina, I will say, although the coal ash is sort of spread across the state. Eastern North Carolina is North Carolina's Black Belt. And so it has the highest concentration of Black residents of any area of the state, aside from areas that are the urban centers. But yeah, these are those places where Black folks maybe never left the plantation, created their own places after slavery, and continue to, practice their placemaking.
That, first of all, I want to say that what's part of what's so powerful about this conversation with you is the fact that you have all of those things mapped in that place, right? I feel like I'm sure there are folks working in every place around these kinds of matters, but I mean, I think that's hard, that kind of information itself is a whole mapping and a critical Black studies mapping that you're engaged in, and that bridging both of your, both your activist organizing work and your scholarship and the ways that those intersect. I think I although you said so much in the kinds of ways that, especially towards the end about the Black Belt in relation to these kinds of dumping, I just wanted to anecdotally jump in and say, I have been on my grandfather's farm when I was growing up, when people, when they sprayed chicken house manure, and like literally as a child was like, I can't go to my grandparents' house at this part of the year. Like, this is over. It feels like even when you leave, it's there.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine the kind of, and the level of disruption that you, as you mentioned, I've watched some of the film that's on the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network site. So I mean, I heard one of your members talking and discussing this kind of ever encroaching spray, right? That is, just the idea that you would spray on other people hog feces. Wow. I mean, I guess what I'm doing is just registering the way, when you said that, all of my kind of bodily memory of how terrible that is was activated.
Yeah.
That is so intense.
Yeah.
Could you could you talk to, now that I kind of brought in your work with North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, could you tell us more about that? And could you tell us because I think part of like you having this really sophisticated Black studies geography of what the lay of the land in a place like North Carolina, what and toxic dumping, what are folks in North Carolina, what are you doing in your work to combat all of that, to work against it?
Yeah. So the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network has been around since around 1998, 1999. And it started really in response to a couple of things. So the first thing was just the hog industry, right? So the hog industry really came, as we know it now, really came to power, I would say in the 1980s, and has sort of reached a kind of pivotal moment, like a peak of its sort of proliferation of these just mass, basically hog death sites and waste sites by the late 90s. And there was a lot of mobilization around that. And there was a necessity from folks who were impacted. So East Warren County, right, where this first, right, like the, so-called birthplace of the environmental justice movement, is the same place where, you see a lot of these hog farms, right? So these are overlapping geographies. And so some of the same people who were involved in that struggle got involved in struggle around the hog industry. That also coincided with Hurricane Floyd in 1999, which breached multiple of these hog waste lagoons. And what it meant was that there was just rivers of hog waste, right, like mixed in with the floodwaters. And also just thousands and thousands and thousands of hogs drowned in this moment, along with people and their homes and all of this. So it was they talk about this in during Hurricane Katrina as this sort of like toxic soup, right? This was another version of this in North Carolina, 6 years before Katrina. And yeah, so the network really founded itself as kind of in the aftermath of that disaster to try to organize or work with communities to organize themselves against multiple of these types of industries. So the hog industry remains sort of our nemesis number one, although it has been, it's been restricted in ways that it's not as huge, right, and powerful as it used to be, but it's been supplanted by, you mentioned the poultry industry. There are poultry CAFOs that are now proliferating all over North Carolina, and they're very difficult to monitor because the industries got smart and worked with legislators to not have that industry permitted, right, or monitored as closely. So it's very hard to even know how many there are and where they are. But we know that there are a lot of them in the same areas where the hog facilities are. So yeah, it's just sort of the work just really evolved from there. There was, the organizers that were working with us, with the network at that time, were contacted by communities across the state for every, kind of egregious, right, like landfills, right, chicken litter burning plants, you name it, right? And so the purpose of the network really is to, it's like organize the organizers, right, where they are. So, our organizers come in, they consult with communities, they help communities form their own grassroots organizations. And the whole point is that you're best suited, right, to fight where you live, and not to have people fighting on your behalf at a distance. But it is always helpful to have both organizing support to amplify the work you're doing and to establish a network of similarly situated communities and organizations so that you can kind of build collective power. And that's what the network's been doing over the last 20 plus years now.
So powerful and important. Just that kind of, just pooling the kind of collective resources like that through organizing. I think that's where we are. I wanted to say, it's so funny, but I guess because I grew up in Virginia.
Yeah.
I keep going with these little anecdotal references, but it's helping me to clarify. I think because Floyd also hit my hometown, and not with nearly the same devastation. And but I remember in that moment just witnessing. I mean, we didn't have electricity for 2 weeks, so it was a very pointed experience, or more in some places. It was a very pointed experience around just for rural communities in general, broadly, what the kind of stakes are. And I think much like how you framed it in relation to Katrina, I think Katrina was my moment of fuller recognition. It was like, and another interview is quite interesting. Of course, Dr. Justin Hosby also works on New Orleans, so it makes sense. But he's talking with Alexis about his, the ways that Katrina shaped his consciousness. Yeah. What do you make of the fact that these traumatic events like storms and other kind of phenomenon that are being driven by toxic stewardship and global warming and all these things, or climate change? What do you make of that relationship between, say, how the network came to be and the destructiveness? Could you just talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think these sorts of events really bring to bear the ways in which the existing structures that are supposed to be governing us, that are supposed to be protecting us, providing some sort of safety net, I guess for lack of a better term, are not equipped to do that, and in fact, right, are really antagonistic, right, to Black and Brown and Indigenous folks' lives, livelihoods, and survival. And we know this, right, as we, in the time between catastrophe, it feels like, and we fight on different fronts in that in-between time. But when those sorts of huge events come to bear, right, and they kind of end up happening, it's a moment, I think, that people have to, like, by necessity, rally together and figure out, like, okay, here we are again, right? Most times, right? Like, at this point, yeah, even I've been back in North Carolina. I grew up in North Carolina, but I've only been back in North Carolina for about the last 8 years now. And in that time, like, we've been through 3 hurricanes, right, that have really been devastating for Eastern North Carolina. And every single time, right, it's like, oh, okay, we've been working on this, and we said that we need to do this, and now we really have to do this, right? And it really, it's just, they're so all-encompassing, they're so totalizing, right? And they're so urgent. And it's not as though people aren't aware of what needs to be done, right, before they happen. But I do think that the requisite energy and resources necessary to make things happen typically happen, when the worst happens. And it's a hard thing, it's really hard to, and I grapple with this like daily, right? It's really hard to kind of just like live your like Black life, right? Like your day-to-day, right, life, and fight, to focus on this sort of one fight, right? Or this one front that you think is really important, much less to try to like be that expansive and do this sort of work all the time. So I think that's one of the, it's a problem of, it's a problem of capitalism. It's a problem of like, like how our systems are structured to keep us, right, siloed, how time works, right, in our society, and then also like how all of those things are upended, right, when those sorts of catastrophes happen.
And we're currently presented with so much catastrophe, right?
Yeah.
And I think, I kind of learned this in relation to a conversation in a course with Ruthie Gilmore a long time ago, but she was like, crisis opens roads,
Yeah.
and that's not predetermined, those roads. So I wonder, okay, so drawing on the work that you do with the environmental network, what could the future look like after this when we get back outside? Like, what are the possibilities for, like, if Black North Carolinians that are part of your network had their vision for the land and for the water and for themselves, what would it look like?
That's a really great question. I think we're in the midst of we're in the midst of those very conversations right now. We normally gather, for instance, every year, every October. We know for our annual summit, we know that we cannot do that this year. And actually thinking through like the limitations of technology, right, for our connectivity, because most of our community members don't have access to broadband in such a way that having like a virtual summit would make any sense, right? So there are limitations in in the ways in which like the current technologies and formations, right, like available to us. They don't work the same way, and particularly in the communities that we're in conversation with or in this network with. And so one of the things that, a future could really look like, beyond the things that like we kind of have like people have known that we need better internet connectivity. And then also like there are all sorts of limitations with that. And like, is that really the future we want, right? But thinking through like, some of the things that have happened in the aftermath, like let's say of Hurricane Florence just a couple of years ago, it really has been these networks of mutual aid. It's been, and these formations come together kind of temporarily, right? Like in the aftermath, but they don't persist. And one of the things that I think this moment presents like possibly the best argument for those networks really persisting, right? And like us working around these technological limitations, which may not even be limitations for, very much longer. We don't know what's going to happen to our infrastructure. We don't know, and we shouldn't, in my mind, and I think a lot of the minds of the folks who are in this work, the elders in particular, like, let's not rely on the internet, like, to be the thing, right? Let's do what we can with the internet. Let's do what we can with like the technology that we have. But let's figure out like, let's get back to some like real basics about how we care for one another and how we are in a relationship with one another. That is the thing that we do know, that across these 20 plus years that we've been in this work together, those are the things that we know work. And how do we expand on that? How do we build on that in ways that feel, I don't know, I don't want to say like institutionalized. I want us to be flexible, but you know what I mean? Like, how do we build on those things in ways that allow us to create to keep our mind on what is important to us and to create the kind of networks of care and communities of care, whether or not this all collapses, right? Yeah, I think I was in a conversation with some folks at a land co-op called Earthseed in Durham, just maybe 10 to 15 minutes from my home. And it's a Black and brown land cooperative. And one of the things that they said is like, yeah, you know, we were inspired by Octavia Butler. We were inspired by this sort of dystopian novel, and to sort of build this intentional community. And it's like, so it's like, yes, like there are ways in which we're trying to practice what it means to be ready for a collapse, right? And what we do to take care for one another. And also, even if that collapse doesn't happen, right? Like, even if, like, we still have to eat, we still have to care for one another. And so let's be in that practice.
Thank you for that beautiful reflection. It's so intense the ways I interviewed just before you this morning, my time this morning, Hilda Llorens, I think I mentioned that, but she was discussing just how in Afro-Puerto Rican, Black Puerto Rican diasporas, these mutual aid networks function in the ways that she really, for her, embodied in her own mom's work, you know, at the ecological margins in Puerto Rico, but connecting that back to the folks in the diaspora. I mean, literally through taste and and cuisine and recipes. That's really, really, and I think which I also find really compelling what you're saying around doing the world, creating the world, and that we need, and practicing that as through mutual aid and through other means. You know, whether or not collapse happens, and the likelihood is that it will, right? Given what we've seen and what we know. I wanted to say too as well, one of the other folks on the, you know, because you where you are in terms of the interviews, I have all the insights of the former interviews. One of the folks that we interviewed was an artist, Huewayne Watson, who's a printmaker and who does printmaking work and also like bee ecologies and like a kind of intimate photography work with bees and flowers. But one of the things that he also has worked on is thinking about and theorizing how like the materiality of print culture is so important in relation to Black diasporic life. And so I wonder how, you know, like even for y'all, instead of, even though it doesn't have the same power as being able to embrace for your meeting, what it might look like to like kick back to the very like print and material. Like how that also how that practices other forms. Like, I mean, you could in that form, you can have different things that, you know, that I guess that rehearse mutuality for when we get back outside, you know. Anyway.
Yeah. It, you know, this moment is really making clear for us, right? Like the inadequacy of the virtual, right? Like it really is, you know, and we've always known that in some sense, because we make a decision that we come together. Like we don't have like online meetings, right? Like we don't like our practice is like, I want to see you in person and let's talk and let's break bread and let's figure this out together. Let's, you know, do this annually, but we also do these quarterly meetings in different communities throughout the year. And yeah, and we have really, you know, been kind of stumped by this moment and being like, we can't do this on a Zoom, right? Like we can't do it on a Zoom, you know, not only because it's not like our way of doing things, but just like the access, it's just the accessibility of it. So I would love to see us, I mean, and people have, and it's so funny, JT, like people have been suggesting to us for a long time, like, y'all, we need a print newsletter. Like we need something that I can hold and get shipped to me. Like we need something that is, like a tangible like communication. And, you know, it's been hard to like really think, you know, through that, because people don't, you know, this is something that we're conditioned at this point to move away from. But yeah, we're going to have to figure out something, right? Because it's going to be, I just know that it's going to be a while before, given the like particular vulnerabilities of the communities that we work with, that we'll be able to gather in person and embrace in person, and really thinking through like, how do we connect? And it really is a very tangible like problem. It's like, how are we staying connected when we can't be in person? And yeah, like this is making me think like a lot more about like, what did people do when they couldn't, you know what I mean? Like, what did people do? And so it's so important, like these old traditions. And like, this is why, you know, history is like hella important, like always. Like, we got to remember what we did before we had all of this.
Right.
And it's going to be, you know, in so many ways, like for our future, like essential communication, essential, like, ways to connect. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I really appreciate you. I know in the midst of all that's going on, and all of your work, I really appreciate you taking the time to discuss with us all of this. I'm gonna stop the recording.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
We are just so blessed to have had Danielle, especially after this work from Huewayne and the conversation with Wendy and Kali. I think we can start to see this kind of parallels. Next, we're going to pivot to a conversation that really does kind of center food sovereignty and food, particularly in a very practical way. We are next going to have a conversation between Kamal Bell, who's the owner of Sankofa Farms, a 12-acre farm launched through a USDA Farm Service Agency's direct farm ownership loan that works to improve food policy and access throughout North Carolina's Triangle. And Ajamu Amiri Dillahunt, who's a PhD student in history at Michigan State, and also an organizer who is partially North Carolina based. So we'll transition to them now. And I think it's such a great segue, you know, to have these folks in conversation. So sit back.
I'm joined by brother Kamal Bell, farmer in North Carolina, and I'll allow brother Kamal to introduce himself, where he's from, and his work in North Carolina. So, brother Kamal.
All right, thank you, Ajamu. I just want to make sure, can you still see me all right? As I'm sitting, I'm sitting on my tractor.
Oh yeah,
all right.
We're good.
All right. I am Kamal Bell, the owner of Sankofa Farms. I'm from Durham, North Carolina, and we farm out here in a place called Cedar Grove, North Carolina.
Okay, and where'd you do your studies at?
All right, my undergraduate was at North Carolina A&T. I majored in animal science. My master's is in agricultural education. I also got that at North Carolina A&T. And I'm currently working on my doctorate in agricultural extension education at North Carolina State.
That's solid. That's solid. And so you mentioned you're the owner of Sankofa's Farm. Can you tell us the origins of Sankofa's Farm and, you know, you all's mission and some of the work that you all do?
So the origin of Sankofa Farms is it was created to get people who were affected by food deserts, healthy, nutritious food. And as we've developed the model of the farm, that mission looks completely different than I actually envisioned it before we started the program, or we started the farm. And the name Sankofa is out of West Africa. It means to go back and get it. But the way that we explain it to our youth is a term that means to remember your African ancestry as you move forward in life. So everything that we try to do at the farm, we try to keep the environment in that we're just stewards of the land and we don't own it. We try to keep that the center of what we do here at the farm.
Oh, that's amazing. And to have people go back and connect to land is something we need more than ever. And you all recently gave packed food boxes for the Fight for 15. Could you tell me a little more about that?
Oh, yeah, so the Fight for 15 is a really cool initiative here. Well, it's an organization, but to raise up North Carolina, but they have an initiative where they're getting people who are living in food deserts or are affected by food inequality, healthy food. And Clara reached out to us and asked, like, our missions were similar, and asked could they purchase 20 shares of our CSA. So a CSA is community supported agriculture, and what that is when you produce a certain amount of food and people from the community are able to buy it and in a bundle at an affordable price. So she asked if she purchased 20 bundles of our CSA. I was like, of course. And we ended up working, and they get food from us every other week. So we drop off food from the farm to them every 2 weeks. So it's a really cool initiative.
That's solid. That's solid. And, given COVID-19 and the struggle against police violence, how has Sankofa responded to that? And how do you all see the best way to move forward?
That's a great question. I think you're the first person to ask us a question of that nature. I think people just see the farm and they just see like, oh, you're just producing food. But I don't think all the time they realize that we're working with youth as well. Well, people realize we're working with youth, but they just think from a agricultural context. So one thing that we've done is we're growing the program. We're actually going to have 7 youth this summer, 8 this summer, and instead of our standard 5. And then we're also we talk about these things with the students. So we always try to provide a social context for them and let them know socially what we're going against. And we have this conversations about police brutality. We've been having them. We've been having conversations about their role in their community and how they can better it. So when something like this happens, it's not a big shift for us because it was work that we were already doing. So the situation with the police brutality is just that we have to realize that there are a lot of things going on in society, and sometimes things are manipulated to incur a certain response out of people, especially when we show that we're focused on a specific thing that can help us break the chains and change the system. So, and ultimately construct our own. So when it comes to police brutality, we try to talk about how to view it we all talk about our own individual perspectives, but then why do the police exist? Why are they targeting Black people? How have people responded to this brutality? Why are people just seeing it now that Black people have been facing all these years of oppression? Like, why does it take this instant? So we talk about it in that context to help us move forward and actually continue to push for change the way that we see.
That's solid. That's solid. And you mentioned the youth program, and y'all have been doing excellent things. I've been following you all for years now. Could you tell us a little more about the youth program and how it's structured? And what you all do with young people?
Yeah. So the program started in 2016. So it's been in existence since we had the farm. And the way that we structured the program was that we wanted the farm to be sustainable. And just outside of sustainable agricultural practices, the way to do that is to incorporate youth. So I invited students from the classrooms that I was teaching in to come out to the farm because I didn't think the school necessarily had the system to support the students. So the students have just come out here for the last 5 years, and 5 summers, and they've just been growing with the farm and growing as young men and being able to respond to not saying they're doing it exactly, they're being able to create an idea of how they can respond to injustices and things that they don't see as correct in their community. It's a space for us to talk about those things, and it's a space for us to directly impact change. And that's what the program is for these young men.
Perfect. Thank you. And just a more. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I hear you now.
Okay. And just for a little more context in terms of, being a Black farmer in North Carolina and in the South, what's the network like of Black farmers here? What may be some struggles in terms of against the power structure, all these different elements. What is it like being a farmer in NC and the network of farmers?
So farming has, if we want to go like the historical route, it's rooted in racism and taking advantage of vulnerable groups. So you still see that metric in it today, but what we've tried to do is we've tried to put ourselves in a position where, like, we know we have to deal with it, but how can we do everything on our part to deal with it the least amount of time as possible, because it gets draining. So we do have a network of Black farmers that I talk to all the time, and we all communicate. We're probably talking weekly at this point, which is real cool to see that our bond is getting stronger. But also to try to stay ahead of the curve and try to incorporate just the ideas of independence in everything that we do, because there's so many revolving parts around the agricultural system and also what's needed specifically on the farm, that when you're sourcing these when you're trying to use these different metrics as a resource, like clearing land, you're not running into people that look like you. So trying to figure out, all right, when not necessarily saying that people are racist, but the structure of it is for me not to be able to reach out to a Black man to clear land and have the equipment to do it, or even to no one, is an issue. And it's 2020. So just dealing with those type of instances while steady thinking about how can we change the system so it can more so reflect equality and independence on our end.
Word, the independence is definitely necessary. So how can we support Sankofa Farms, and whether it be, donating or whether it be stuff here in NC, what can we do to support y'all in this period?
So you can go to our website, sankofafarmsllc.com, and there's a donate button. And whether it's 2 cents, whether it's $20, whether you say, I ain't got no money, but I want to come out and volunteer, just to support in any capacity outside, it doesn't have to be monetary. So if people can just follow our journey, and people always ask, how can they help? But people have talents and skills inherently that somebody's probably better at building stuff than me, or they know somebody can build stuff really well. Just connecting us to resources, that's the best way to help Sankofa, whether it's monetary or whether it's skills, whether it's, hey, I have some background in catching bees. So it can be something random. But if people can reach out and tell us how they think they can help, we can better say, hey, we might not need that, or we do need it. Just the communication, that goes a long way.
Okay, bet. Appreciate that. And last thing, because I saw the amazing TED Talk that you gave. Do you mind giving us a little brief overview of what you told the people and, its significance?
Yes. So the talk was called Embodying Sankofa. And what the underlying factor of the talk was, I think it actually was right on time, because it was done on February 22nd, and right after that we transitioned 2 weeks later into COVID. But was really embracing a new reality and and building off of our prior knowledge on how we've been doing things to usher in a new way of thinking and a new way of doing things, a new way of action. And I hope people watch it and take that from it, because what we're doing is different, and it's ushering a new type of Black student that I don't think we've seen in a long time. So I hope people can embrace it and really see that we're trying our best with the resources that we have to try to change things as much as possible.
Yes, indeed. I took notes during it, brother, and again, it was an excellent talk. And thank you again for talking with me today. And looking forward to being in struggle with you. And you know, I support Sankofa Farms 100%. And you know, whatever we can do here, based in Raleigh, you know, whatever is necessary, just let me know, and you know, we move forward.
Well, do appreciate that. Appreciate
you, man. All right, thanks for joining, man.
No problem. Have a great day.
All right, you too.
All right, peace.
So already we're, you know, seeing very practically how we might, you know, make these connections between in different networks. Especially, we got a lot of North Carolina in the house today, so that's a good look. If you're in North Carolina, you should already know where to go connect. We also shared Sankofa Farms, their link in the thing, should you be so compelled to donate. Next we have, and I think it's right on time in terms of us thinking about this kind of larger movement of Black folks in relation to agriculture and farming, and the kind of complex histories that and work that requires. We'll be transitioning to a discussion with Jarvis McInnis, who is Cordelia and William Laverack Family Assistant Professor of English at Duke University, and also just a good brother. So if we could transition to Jarvis.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jarvis McInnis, and I would like to begin this evening by thanking my dear friend and colleague, James Roane, JT Roane, for inviting me to be a part of this really fantastic symposium and set of conversations on Black ecologies, as well as his fellow organizers. And I'd also like to thank my fellow presenters, whom I'm honored to present alongside, virtually, that is, and just to say that I'm honored to be in conversation with you all and to learn from your fantastic work. So I will share my screen now and then get started with this discussion with my paper. Here we go. So my paper is entitled Afterlives of the Plantation in the Global Black South, Resistance, Revaluation, and Regeneration. On September 14th, 2017, Danielle Ryder, an African-American woman in Killeen, Texas, created quite a stir on social media by protesting cotton stalks on display in a local Hobby Lobby store. She wrote the following comment on the company's Facebook page. "This decor is wrong on so many levels. There is nothing decorative about raw cotton, a commodity which was gained at the expense of African-American slaves. A little sensitivity goes a long way. Please remove this decor." On Facebook, and this was in 2017, the post garnered more than 115,000 reactions, 24,164 shares, and over 200 home for dinner to discuss their experiences at the university. Students were shocked to find cotton stalks as centerpieces on their dinner tables, perhaps from Hobby Lobby, and traditionally African-American cuisine. According to one student's Instagram post, when students inquired about the cotton stalks, Lowry gave the following flippant response. His response was that he didn't know. He'd seen it before we did. He kind of thought it was fallish. Then he said, "It isn't inherently bad if we're all wearing it," then walked off. The original Instagram post garnered 501 likes. Now, to his credit, Lowry posted a written apology to the university's Facebook page, which garnered 394 responses, 201 shares, and 824 comments, and a recorded video apology as well. As you can imagine, both instances drew a range of responses, from solidarity and empathy, mostly toward the Lipscomb students, to ridicule and outrage at their sensitivity directed at both the Lipscomb students and especially Miss Ryder. After all, it was only cotton, and Black people are not the only racial group that has picked cotton in the US. If they were offended by the cotton stalks, then they should stop being hypocrites and refrain from wearing cotton clothing altogether, so the logic went. The tension between Blackness and cotton illustrated here is what animates my essay, Behold the Land, W.E.B. Du Bois, Cotton Futures, and the Afterlife of the Plantation in the US South, where I examine Du Bois's writings about the cotton industry, from his first novel, The Quest of the Silver Fleece, to his sociological and political economic essays, to reconstruct his relationship to the US South and his efforts to imagine a future there for African Americans. In particular, I briefly explore how Du Bois turns to literature and the sacred to reimagine the fraught and seemingly irreparable relationship between Blackness and cotton in the New South. In contrast to the violent racial capitalist logics and undergirding the libidinal and political economies of the cotton plantation and its afterlives, such as sharecropping, tenant farming, the chain gang, etc. Du Bois deploys conjure to imagine a non-commodity future for cotton. Elspeth, a conjure woman, performs an ancient African ritual to consecrate a batch of cottonseed. And Zora, her daughter and the novel's protagonist and heroine, plants and raises the cotton for its beauty and the sheer pleasure of cultivating it and watching it grow. Zora's relationship to the plant is neither utilitarian nor capitalistic, but rather fetishistic and sacred. Her efforts to extricate cotton from the market economy by proclaiming it as, quote, an holy thing, I argue, interpolates this plantation commodity into an alternative economy of value that challenges the logics of the neo-plantation regime in the New South. Thus, Du Bois turns to literature to not only critique the plantation school within American letters, but also to explore alternative socioeconomic futures for Black Southerners, particularly through cooperative economics. Despite the ways in which religion helped to grease the wheels of slavery, colonialism, and global capitalism, establishing and justifying the anti-Black logics at the heart of modernity, Du Bois's turn to literature proffers the sacred, as well as beauty and pleasure, as an otherwise mode of valuation that can be irreducible to racial capitalist accumulation and exploitation. In other words, he imagines a future where Zora, a Black woman who survived sexual violence and was once deemed a property, and cotton, chief among plantation commodities in the US South, are irreducible to the commodity form. This notion of the commodity turned sacral object, the possibility of revaluing things outside of a use value, exchange value binary, captures one arm of my research interests, which interrogates Black people's affective relationship to land, farming, and especially the cultivation of the cash crops or plantation commodities their ancestors were forced to cultivate during slavery, as sharecroppers and tenant farmers following emancipation, or during colonialism and imperialism in the broader diaspora. In the US, cotton and the cotton industry have been deeply entangled with the lives of Black folk in profound and insidious ways, from plantation slavery to sharecropping and tenant farming, racial epithets such as cotton picking Negro or cottonhead to refer to Black people's hair, and in popular culture, from blackface minstrelsy to the Cotton Club in 1920s Harlem, an infamous segregated performance venue where Black people were only admitted as performers and servers for white patrons. Given this long and tortured history of Black people's exploitation at the hands of slavery and the cotton industry in particular, my essay asks, can we resignify cotton and its paraphernalia from its connection to the violence of slavery and capitalism? Can it be valued differently, otherwise? For instance, what do we make of Solomon Northup, a freedman captured and sold into slavery, who acknowledges in his slave narrative that there are few things more beautiful than a field of cotton in bloom? Or images such as this one, where Black school children at the turn of the 20th century are depicted learning about cotton cultivation at the Annie Davis School near Tuskegee, Alabama. Or the enslaved mother in South Carolina, when her daughter Ashley was sold away, gave her a cotton sack with a tattered dress, 3 handfuls of pecans, a lock of her hair, and assurance that it would be filled with love always. The mother and daughter never saw each other again, but the story was passed down orally. And in 1921, Ashley's granddaughter, Ruth Middleton, stitched her grandmother's story into the cotton sack shown here. It reads, "She was sold at 9 in South Carolina. It held a tattered dress, 3 handfuls of pecans, a braid of Rose's hair, told her it'd be filled with love always. She never saw her again. Ashley is my grandmother, Ruth Middleton, 1921. These are precisely the questions that Du Bois grapples with in The Quest of the Silver Fleece, and ultimately what the young woman at Hobby Lobby is asking us to grapple with as well, however clumsily. In crafting The Quest of the Silver Fleece as an anti-plantation romance, to challenge both the political and libidinal economies of the cotton industry and the plantation romance genre, its literary counterpart, Du Bois imagines new possibilities for the relationship between Blackness and cotton, reimagining the fiber as an aesthetic object, a sacral object, and ultimately as the basis for a cooperative community to protect Southern Black folk from the exploitation of sharecropping and the plantation economy in the Jim Crow South. In short, through the sacred, beauty, and collectivity, I argue, Du Bois interpolates cotton within an alternative economy of value that is irreducible to racial capitalism, property ownership, and sexual violence. Since the publication of The Quest of the Silver Fleece, the relationship between Blackness and cotton has radically shifted. Most Black people have never picked cotton, and most have never seen a cotton field, I would imagine. Still, the immense attention that these incidents attracted on social media and some news sites are deeply linked to a wider debate that the country is struggling with right now over the history and memory of slavery and the Civil War. What should our relationship be to something as ubiquitous and mundane as cotton, or even sugar for that matter, another plantation commodity that fueled the transatlantic slave trade and the domestic trade in the US? We often consume them in inordinate amounts with little thought to the exploitative labor practices and environmental costs used to mass produce them, both past and present. And obviously, this is by no means an exhaustive list of things we consume that exploit other humans or the environment. Is there a qualitative or ethical difference between using a raw cotton stalk as decor, as Ms. Ryder intimates, as opposed to wearing clothing made from cotton? Right? These questions, though deemed ludicrous by many of the respondents to Ms. Ryder's post, reflect the underlying spirit of contemporary debates about the rebel flag, Confederate monument, and the plantation tourism industry, and various other afterlives of slavery and the plantation. In my forthcoming book project, Afterlives of the Plantation, I examined Booker T. Washington's Tuskegee Institute, a former cotton plantation turned industrial school in rural Alabama, as a nodal point of diasporic connectivity and a heuristic for exploring how Afro-descended peoples responded to the legacies of the plantation in the global Black South. I define the global Black South as a hemispheric geography connecting the US South and the Caribbean, as well as the Caribbean coast of Latin America, where the plantation was once and often continues to be the organizing principle of Black life. In so doing, I take seriously the paradox of the plantation as a space where the most extreme forms of violence were cultivated and refined against Black bodies, and yet was also the genesis of Black modernity. Ultimately, I'm interested in what else the plantation produced besides the racial sexual violence, economic exploitation, and ecological degradation it set in motion and continue to linger into the present, what Catherine McKittrick might call plantation futures, and how Black people have variously adapted and jettisoned its logics of domination over peoples, plants, animals, and things. My work on the afterlife of the plantation in the global Black South has focused on myriad aesthetic practices, affective associations, and political economic projects that emerge in response to the plantation's legacies throughout the Western Hemisphere, from the establishment of schools like Tuskegee to the cotton farmer, a newspaper established by Black sharecroppers and tenant farmers who were employed by the Delta and Pine Land Company, once the largest corporate cotton plantation in the world, located in the Mississippi Delta in the 1920s. In short, I have been and remain interested in practices of diasporic relationality and articulations of Black futures within and against sites and spaces of social death. As my essay on Du Bois's The Quest of the Silver Fleece indicates, however, I've also been interested in what thinking about plantation ecologies alongside its various economies opens up for Black studies. More specifically, I'm interested in what kinds of things grew on the margins of the cotton, sugar, rice, and tobacco fields that populated the Americas, or on the provision grounds and garden plots, such as Black personhood and subjectivity, that resisted deracination and continued to regenerate themselves, even in the nutrient-depleted soils left in the wake of the plantation's extractive agricultural practices. To this end, I have been drawn to recent scholarship on the plantational scene. As several scholars in Black studies have reminded us, the plantational scene in its original conceptualization is a fraught and contested concept. Janae Davis, Alex Moulton, Levi Van Sant, and Brian Williams, for instance, critiqued the concept for offering a flattened multi-species argument that fails to acknowledge the centrality of racialization within the plantation's ecology of terror. They rightly remind us that not all humans are equally complicit in the devastation that the plantation has wrought. We do not all share equal access to the category of man that it helped to construct, nor do we wish to. And as some of us remain the disproportionate victims of its racial capitalist offspring, from prisons to labor migration to environmental racism. Furthermore, they contend that, quote, the emerging plantational scene discussion has yet to meaningfully engage with the wide variety of existing critiques of the plantation mode of development, but particularly in the fields of Black geographies and Black ecologies. And this is where I wish to enter. Despite the plantational scene's initial conceptual limitations, what I find useful and thus wish to hold on to is its focus on ecology and environmentalism. Thus examining Tuskegee, which imagined Black modernity through agriculture and farming in the immediate aftermath of slavery, as a byproduct of the plantational scene, enables me to broaden my initial aesthetic and political economic approach to the afterlife of the plantation to include the intersections of Black life and plant life as well. Now, to be clear, I'm not interested in drawing a kind of facile equivalence between Black people and plants, as Black people have yet to gain full access to the rights and privileges of the human, as our current news cycles constantly reminds us. Thus, I am not interested in abandoning the human. Rather, by interrogating the overlapping plantation logics that drove the coterminous domination of people and of plants alike, right, of genocide and of ecocide, we can begin to track practices and ideologies of resistance, of persistence, and hopefully of repair. In short, my approach to the plantational scene acknowledges that the plantation is a technology of racialization, sexual violence, economic exploitation, and resource extraction, depletion, and death. However, I am also interested in logics and practices of reuse, regeneration, sustainability, and mutuality between Black people and the earth. To this end, I ask, how have Black people attempted to repurpose these spaces and logics to build, construct, and create anew? And what are the limits and possibilities of such a project? What can grow on the site of such unspeakable violence, beyond cotton, sugar, rice, tobacco, and other cash crops whose cultivation was used to deplete lands and Black bodies alike? What kinds of freedom dreams or blues epistemologies can such a wholly contaminated space generate? Can the originary violences ever be sufficiently burned away, evacuated, so as not to seep into the Black futures constructed on top of it? Or will the space always bear traces of its former purpose? Ultimately, I am after the strategies and practices of Black world making out of the ruins and rubble created by racial capitalism. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. I was so tempted the whole time to keep writing in the chat as I normally do, and as y'all probably tired of me doing. But I was trying to respect y'all's viewing practice. Jarvis, that was really compelling, so thank you. Last but not least, we have Shamara Wiley Alhassan, who's assistant professor of the Black Experience in the Americas and Religious Studies in the School of Historical, Philosophical, and Religious Studies at ASU. And this is a really brilliant discussion of Rasta ecologies. So sit back and get ready.
Greetings. Give thanks to the Creator and the ancestors for the ability to share my work with all of you today. Give thanks to JT Roane, Justin Hosby, and the entire planning committee for organizing the Black Ecologies Initiative Conversation Series. My name is Dr. Shamara Wiley Alhassan, and my talk is entitled, We Are Mother Earth, Mothers of Creation, Rastafari Women's Levitical Ecologies. In her book, In the Wake on Blackness and Being, Christina Sharp defines the weather. She writes, the weather is the totalizing of our environments. The weather is the total climate, and the climate is anti-Black. And what I'm calling the weather, anti-Blackness, is pervasive as climate, but the shipped, the held, and those in the wake also produce out of the weather their own ecologies. When the only certainty is the weather that produces a pervasive climate of anti-Blackness, what must we know in order to move through these environments in which the push is always toward Black death? Christina Sharp describes the totalizing nature of anti-Blackness as the weather, the climate. Ecological discourse that does not attend to anti-Blackness will not achieve the goal of stopping the climate crisis or achieve sustainability for the planet and all planetary beings. The knee of white supremacy has been on the neck of Black people and by extension the earth since 1441. The transatlantic slave trade, colonization, war, and genocide have raped the earth of resources and robbed Black people and therefore all planetary beings of life. Working with Sharp's definition of anti-Blackness as the weather, the climate, I explore Rastafari Women's Levitical ecologies that are part of the methodology of resistance or Black ecologies emerging from surviving the weather, claiming life in the face of anti-Black genocide. The refusal of certain death produces ecologies that encompasses not only human-to-human relationships, but human nature relationships and human spiritual relationships. I. Following Sharp's methodology, I turn to the personal to avoid this violence of abstraction and to undiscipline myself from epistemic and methodological practices that would reinscribe our own annihilation, my own annihilation. I am a Rastafari woman who grew up in the mountains of Northern California. As you can see, the California redwood trees pictured here. I hail from the redwood trees, the sand dunes, rivers, and oceans that mentored and mothered me spiritually. From a very young age, sitting by the ocean shore, feeling the breeze was one of the fugitive moments of freedom I experienced in white supremacist heteropatriarchal capitalism. Everyone who visits where I'm from says the environment is beautiful, and of course, we're home to notorious conservation efforts. But while I grew up bearing witness to active sustainability efforts, it was always tempered with anti-Black violence. I went to schools with swastikas and white power carved in desks, in bathroom mirrors, on seats. The environment, the climate, the weather in the mountains amongst the redwood trees of Northern California is anti-Black. In the space of anti-Blackness, my parents raised us, myself and two brothers, Rastafari. We developed a Levitical ecology that involved a love of ourselves as Black beings, of Africa as the epicenter of life, of the spiritual realm, and of planetary intersubjectivity with Mother Earth. Rastafari is a lived philosophy, spirituality, and way of life committed to freedom for Africa, all Black people, reparations for the Ma'afa, and the planetary sustenance of life rooted in the organizing principle of love. Love, not in the capitalist romantic sense, but in the radical sense that demands a reconfiguration of our thinking, our language, our values, our being for our mutual planetary health and wellness. This new knowing is informed by M. Jackie Alexander's notion of sacred embodiment, where she writes that the personal is sacred and political. Drawing upon the meaning-making of African-based cosmological systems, she argues that, quote, they mediate a process of interdependence, of mutual beingness, in which one becomes oneself in the process of becoming one with the sacred. They manifest their sacredness in nature, as well as their relationship with human beings, both of which take shape in a process of mutual embodiment, unquote. Alexander's notion of mutual sacred embodiment with living beings and the planet describes the Rastafari notion of I and I. Rather than saying you and me, the Rastafari notion of I recognizes the intersubjective relationship or oneness of our relationship to others, the planet, and the spiritual realm. In fact, Queen Mother Moses, the Rastafari woman and CEO and founder of the Empress of Zion organization, says an often quoted Rastafari phrase, quote, we are spiritual beings having a human experience, unquote. Rastafari recognize our mutual beingness as divine, as spiritually eternal, and physically temporary. Nurtured in this Rastafari ecology, I have come to understand the import of life-giving and sustaining philosophies for countering the push toward Black death. Rastafari woman's Levitical ecology. These life-giving philosophies create Levitical ecologies that are premised on reproduction, birth, and the womb. Rastafari families engage in these processes. In my experience working with Rastafari women for the past 15 years, I have found that sistering produce a Levitical ecology that actively dismantles all forms of oppression and instills balance, Black life, Black joy, freedom of Africa as the primary organizing principles for sustaining life. Liberty is a Rastafari word that means lived philosophy and encompasses a daily commitment to decolonizing oneself from the climate crisis of anti-Blackness. And when we look at Rastafari women's liberty, we see that liberty means decolonization of sexism and all other forms of oppression. Therefore, Levitical ecology describes daily anti-colonial or decolonial strategies that are implemented to sustain and reproduce Earth life force for all planetary beings. And you see a picture of our planet pictured here. What does Rastafari women's Levitical ecology look like? Rastafari women's Levitical ecology looks like Akila Jaramogi's Fan Zaman's community reforestation project in Trinidad and Tobago. Founded in 1994 and formally registered as an NGO in 1999, Fan Zaman is a thriving community on 125 acres of land that she cultivated over time through planting trees, restoring the watershed, fighting forest fires, and engaging in community education about the importance of caring for Earth's natural resources. Residents live on the land and they have won international awards for their work in ecological restoration and community development. Her actions were a spiritual calling, a life's purpose, to cultivate and reproduce the capacity of Earth, to care for the planet and leave it better than she found it. In a 2013 documentary film entitled Earth, Water, Woman, Community Sustainability in Trinidad and Tobago, Akila Jaramogi says, now I want to play a short clip from the film so you can hear her.
I don't want to see my work go in vain. I don't want to see this 125 acres of land that we have been managing over the years. Some rich person come and buy out the land and just cut down everything and, you know, I don't want to see that. Environmental destruction affects all mankind. Cherish Mama Earth is my plead. Cherish Mama Earth. Love Mama Earth. Save Mother Earth.
Aquila Jaramogi's reforestation of the land in Trinidad is mirrored on a smaller scale in Empress Nautica's creation of a seed bank to foster food security with women in Ghana. The alliance between the Rastafari community of Ghana and Food Sovereignty Ghana to stop the importation of genetically modified seeds inspired Empress Nautica to begin a seed bank in 2013. Empress Nautica, a French-born African Rastafari woman, created a seed bank to collect and preserve seeds for prosperity. She began the seed bank between 2013 and 2014 in Barbados and launched the Green Hope Organic Seed Bank in 2016 on Empress Menende in Ghana. Citing Kenyan environmental activist Wangari Maathai as her inspiration, she says,
yeah, welcome, sis. I sent you this thing because of Wangari Maathai. She has become my mentor, even though she belongs to the ancestral realm. She's my mentor in the fact that she was the first Black woman to become Nobel Prize of Peace, first African woman to win the Nobel Prize of Peace, and her life was made of many firsts. She was the first female minister in Kenya as well. And her movement, the Green Belt movement, was what inspired Green Hope Organic Seed Bank. If I have to talk about inspiration, she's one of the women who has inspired me the most as far as the Green Hope Organic Seed Bank is concerned. So she says something that is the little things that people do, and me, my little thing is to plant trees. So she organized all the women to plant trees, stop desertification, organize reforestation, food sovereignty, reduce poverty, just because of her trees. So it's something that's why I send these pictures, the trees and all those things.
And here you can see pictured the Green Hope Organic Seed Bank launch in Ghana in 2016, where she's standing with several women who are participants, as well as some photos that inspire her and quotes that inspire her. After living in Ghana for 8 years, Empress Nautica said she noticed, quote, the lack of food choice in Ghana. She wanted to come home and be self-reliant, especially as GMOs and pesticides prevail. Starting the seed bank was a way to accomplish her goal of self-reliance and quote, interact with women in rural environments, share knowledge, and exchange something even when we are very poor. It helps the woman to have food variety, exchange herbal medicinal knowledge, and survival skills, unquote. In 2016, she launched the bank in Ghana by donating seeds to women in attendance and encouraging them to plant the seeds and take pictures documenting their cultivation of plants. At the next gathering, she asked them to bring seeds and then exchange their seeds for others, which would increase the variety of organic seeds they had amongst themselves. She said, quote, we are Mother Earth, mothers of creation, unquote. As a mother of 25 years, she has cultivated life by growing 3 human beings. She sees herself as part of sustaining Mother Earth. As part of sustaining the earth, we have a responsibility to practice care for the earth to continue to reproduce. Therefore, Rastafari Women's Levitical Ecology is tied to Leigh Brownhill and Teresa Turner's term, gender-based class analysis, which encompasses popular resistance to capital through a, quote, fight for fertility. Fertility is the capacity to reproduce and sustain life in all its forms, principally people, their labor power, and their food. Land and labor, as well as the knowledge, bodies, and time of women, are major sources of fertility. Women, therefore, have a special stake in exercising control over their own fertility, unquote. Empress Nautica's goal with her seed bank was to nurture, plant, collect seeds, and conduct soil improvement to preserve and cultivate life and Earth's natural fertility. This life-centered Levitical ecology is small scale, but has profound implications to consider ways to resist mass extraction and disposability narratives that shape the current climate crisis. Rastafari women like Mama Akila Jaramogi and Empress Natika embody affirming life-centered or subsistence political economy as opposed to death-centered, profit-based political economy that we live in. At its core, life-centered political economies practice self-determination within the limits of necessity and encompass a moral impulse that with the ways human beings relate to nature. This notion is fundamentally anti-capitalist, pro-small-scale subsistence, where the dispossessed have the right to land and freedom. The answers of how to overcome climate crisis can be found in a complete abolition of anti-Black capitalist accumulation, death-giving political economies that advance white supremacist heteropatriarchy. Black people have created their own life-giving ecologies in different ways since 1441 and before that. Attending to Rastafari women's Levitical ecologies offers new ways for thinking through new futures in Black ecological discourse and activism. At this juncture in 2021, exactly 580 years since the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade, racial slavery or property in the person, people have the opportunity to do something different. People must contend with death-giving organizing principles which they participate in global community. When I have a bad day, I do not kill 8 people. I do not put my knee on the neck of another human being for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I do not invent mass agriculture and enslave generations of human beings in the service of capital. I do not hoard vaccines during a global pandemic and cage migrant children. The weather is anti-Black, and all of us must dismantle anti-Blackness in order to get free. Rastafari Women's Levitical ecologies offer one route to freedom. Give thanks.
We are, since we're so close to our time, I think what we'll do is have about, go about until 7:45, if that's okay. We want to make sure that our folks who are working on the back end are able to get off because they've been grinding with us for weeks on end now. So we want to respect and honor that. If that's okay, though, we'll bring folks to the top and we'll just have a quick discussion for about a few minutes. If you're a panelist, if you want to come to the top and be in discussion, please, I think you have to turn on your video at least for a moment until you're pinned. And then and we can go from there. This was a really wonderful and rich conversation. I see so many powerful threads, but I want to see if there are any questions from the audience, if anyone wants to chime in. I just think there's so much going on here around resistance and in relation to extraction and violence, how the kinds of crises that's touching off in Huewayne's work, in reference to the refugee situations that, as Kali said in the first discussion, are already tied, as we know, and unrest is already tied to climate change. I think also this discussion has just had so much practical information as well. I find myself like between Kamal Bell and Danielle and Kali and them just being like, what, how can we make things happen? Like I leave this one charge, like we got shit to do and we can do it. I guess what I will ask is, I was hoping somebody would come up with a question because y'all know I'm tired. I was hoping for that. I guess, could each of you, the panelists, very quickly just say, I asked you this question, Danielle, already, but out of your work, what does the horizon look like? What does the future look like in which, the kind of histories that you all are highlighting, et cetera, what does that horizon look like? Where can we go from here? Maybe that was too broad a question, but I will.
JT, is that is that for one of us in particular, or?
No, it really is open. You know, if you want to jump in, Jarvis, we love to hear from you about you know, given this kind of complex history of plantations, and what is this kind of re-signifying work that Du Bois is engaged in? What is that? How does that look in our present and future?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, what I would say, just briefly, is that I really do think that we have to. What I'm trying to, I guess, hold on to from Du Bois's project in that novel, and to actually think about it through Tuskegee and just the history of Black farmers and Black people's relationship to agriculture more generally in the aftermath of slavery, is the importance of revaluation, right? Because I think it's through revaluation that we arrive at, it's crucial to imagining otherwise, imagining alternatives, right? So we can't, these sort of crops or these practices, or even just the practice of farming, right? Black people's relationship to the earth, it's not reducible to racial capitalism or to property ownership or to all of the sort of logics that came out of the modern and Enlightenment project, right? The enclosure and the various other sort of modes of violence that emerged from that project, right? And so I think that we need the importance of imagination, of literature, of the aesthetic, right, of the sacred, right. He's giving us these tools in this novel for imagining something else, to suggest that what does it mean to put cotton on an altar, right, for in certain forms of sort of African-derived spiritual practices, right? At that point, cotton is not doing the same thing that it does, in an economy of production, right, and of extraction and of disposability. And so I think that what these thinkers were grappling with at that time in the late 19th and early 20th century was re-signifying Black people's relationship to agricultural labor and production, right? So that they could, figure out how to grow, to feed their families, and not solely for the market, right? And so I think that in addition to that kind of revaluing work or revaluation work, I think that's what we can bring, right, to imagine new futures, right? But also the project of regeneration, right? The fact that exhausted spaces, waste places, lands that have been depleted, how can we begin to recuperate those spaces? And in the process of not recuperating the logics that were the violent logics that were placed there, right, but really planting something else there, right, and regenerate those spaces, and in the process come up with a different kind of affective economy and different practices that, like beauty and pleasure, rest, right, healing, right, as well, using the sacred and the spiritual to do that. So that's what I'm hoping that some of the lessons that we can learn from a late 19th, early 20th century context that we can bring into the present, and pointing out those moments where they faltered, right? Because many of them were still invested in logics of production, right? And in projects that I think we now know need to divorce ourselves from, right?
Thank you so much. Danielle, would you take a stab at that? I mean, you started to get us in that direction when you were in the clip, but I guess just sort of in light of this conversation, what are our prospects? Like, what can we do? And I think that also, this ties. I was so glad to have you and Jarvis on discussion together, because I think what Jarvis is doing around plantation, afterlives, and futures, and what you're doing around the Black town, they're very intimately connected and generative together. But whatever you want to take a stab at, actually, in relation to either, these histories or the prospects for the future, Danielle.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, I think one of the things that is really generative right now is actually seeing the immense overlap in the presentations today. I think, and like all of us are actually coming from different places, right? Not all of us are actually affiliated with the university system, and we're coming to really similar conclusions based on overlapping and intersecting kind of knowledge bases, and a really deep reliance on history that I think is critical to our understanding of how we move forward. And I like, you know, we say that a lot, but I think one of the things that's one of the reasons why it's true is that there have for Black folk, for Indigenous folk in particular, here and across the world, like there's no way that we exist now, right? Like that we're actually talking to each other now without this like really long and deep histories of us figuring out ways around these extractive systems that we're in. And so I think, you know, us like really relying on those histories and remembering, right? And carrying forward the knowledges, the technologies is really what's going to help us make it, right? Like actually survive all of this. So it's really heartening to see that we're kind of talking in a direction, right? That that's coming from multiple directions, right? But we're talking in a kind of synchronous direction that's exciting. And that's to me, a precursor for any kind of movement work, right? Like for any kind of mobilization, which is what we're gonna need on multiple fronts. You have to have a theory of change. You have to have a theory of relation. And the great news is that we actually have always kind of had it, right? So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I want to turn to you, Huewayne, and then we unfortunately have to wrap up. But Huewayne, could you just talk to us more about your practice and also this particular piece? I'm really struck, and you know, because I've seen this a few times now, but I'm really struck by the use of the warming blanket. The warming blanket in so many ways is a reduction of human life and touch and all of that to its kind of barest form, right? It just allows, and this is, I'm drawing on, you know, our conversations, Huewayne. Here you use it as a kind of flag. Could you talk more about that in relation to, you know, yourself as a Black diasporic immigrant artist?
Sure, absolutely. And I'll just say sort of, again, because I've said this recently, you shouldn't really ask an artist to talk about their work, or maybe you shouldn't ask an artist to talk at all, but I'll do my best. I think quite honestly, the work comes out of me thinking in retrospect and really trying to hold on to a lot of what was shared today in terms of what it means to hold on to, practice, and theorize Sankofa, what it means to think back about a past, right? What it means to construct a history, even if we're dealing with constructed histories and context. And I wanted to really point out a certain materiality that we live within that is not necessarily always easy to disrupt. And I think about an example I shared recently, born and raised in Jamaica and immigrating here to the US with my family. I remember the bauxite industry, right? The sort of red dirt being churned and manufactured into what becomes foil paper, aluminum foil. But I remember that was like, and I said this, you know, recently, it's like gold leaf, right? It was gold leaf in 1980s, 1990s Jamaica. You couldn't find foil paper to use, but Jamaica was exporting bauxite, right? This island that is approximately the size of the state of Connecticut, right? When we think about all of what has been extracted from there, right, over a historical period from Spanish colonialism to, British colonialism and imperialism, to the disruptions that happened in the 1970s, right, with the independence movement broadly, right, throughout the Caribbean and the Black diaspora. I think there's a lot to consider in terms of why people move, when they moved, if they're forced, right, to move, and what borders or boundaries do they have to cross, right? I think daily about people stranded at sea, even though those images don't make it into our newsrooms or make it into our headlines often, right? I think about the young children who are experiencing the process of immigration, which I call it a carceral process. I mean, I remember being separated from my parents and my siblings in JFK. I remember landing and feeling like, okay, we're about to walk out into New York City. But I mean, we spent about 3 hours being processed, interviewed separately, answering questions, being fingerprinted and photographed, right? It's an entire carceral process that is tied to forced movement, one that is similar to and parallels, right, what we can understand as domestic slavery and all those different movements throughout the United States. But for me, I wanted to punctuate how that experience of immigration, that process of immigration, is reduced to some of its bare bones, bare necessities, right? A blanket that is essentially one that you would use in an emergency, right? One that is, if not as thin as a sheet of paper, it's probably, right, it's less, right? It's even more thin, and it serves a function. Its primary function is to provide some form of warmth or capturing of body heat, right? Leaving the human body. And it's the same thing that runners use for marathons. We see it when, they're rescuing hikers who are doing deep woods and forest hiking. But at the same time, it is the only thing, right, that is given to young people as provisions, right, on cemented floors surrounded by, right, wire linked fences. And I think seriously about that. I think seriously about what if I didn't answer one of those questions, right, to the whomever, I call it customs in general, but to the INS or whomever officer, right, correctly when we were separated? Would I have entered the port of New York City, whether it's airport or whether it's a ship port, right? We're all cargo in many ways when we're processed through these, right, carceral processes. And only through particular connections and relationships, and I mean, really an expansion of even language into multiple literacies, are we even able to, as immigrant communities, sustain ourselves and survive in many ways beyond the first year or 2 years or 3 years, right? So mutual aid, gardening into farming, farming into gardening, right? Many of these practices are practices that immigrant communities have held on to tightly for a long time because they're essentially the things that are ripped away from us, right? That are stripped away from us and sometimes physically stripped right away from us when we have to process ourselves into a particular type of nation state modernity. And I wanted to sort of signal that there is a waving of a banner. And even as people move in caravans, whether they're waving a white t-shirt or, if someone decided to pick up their their blanket, right, they're signaling something to us that is at least at the national or international or global level.
Thank you all so much. And that was a brilliant way to kind of end this. We're thinking very pointedly about what's happening, at the border and across these carceral geographies. And really, Huewayne, drawing out the kind of legacies and connections between these carceral histories, us all as cargo is something that I'm going to hold on to that you just said for a while, but also the kinds of work of mutual aid, gardening, the immigrant and Black communities and indigenous communities, like that is the basis of some otherwise possibility, as Jarvis invoked. So I want to thank you all so much for this really brilliant and bubbling conversation that's, I think, you all are doing transformative work in each of your own respective ways. And I'm just so blessed to have been part of this and to have been in discussion with you all. Thank you all as well for everyone who came. Again, we probably could have gone on for another couple hours, and we just can't. So I really appreciate you all and your time. And again, to the co-organizers and everyone, we really appreciate you. And we hope to see you next week, same time, a little bit shorter format, but we will have our second keynote. Justin sent that earlier, so please do tune in for Ashante Reese next week. Thank you so much. We're gonna end our recording now. Much love.